So I was out there in the ocean by myself, and for a few hours, the CEO of this company didn't want to talk to me. He said, "Who are you? I have the best recruiters in the world in the transportation industry working on filling this placement. Why would I work with you?" And I said, "Well, are any of them in your parking lot? I'm right outside your door." This industry is so lucrative that if you're not making six figures a year, find another industry to be in. The CEO called me. He pulled up on a job site as he saw his foreman get run over and killed. And he called me crying, and I actually placed a safety director with him for free. I make it a point to tell all of my prospective clients that if we can't be friends, let's not do business together. And they said, "Matt, fight this guy." And it was a 5-minute fight, and he was choking me out for about 4 minutes. But I just didn't tap because I was so pissed off.
Welcome back to the Kickstart Podcast. On this episode, we have the pleasure of hosting Matt, a successful entrepreneur who owns a multi-7-figure recruitment agency, in addition to other exciting businesses that hopefully he's excited to kind of share more about with us. Matt, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Preston. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you guys. I had an opportunity to speak with Ryan several weeks ago, and I was just impressed with your professionalism, your attitudes, and enthusiasm for the industry. So I'm grateful to be here. Thank you.
Means a lot. Appreciate the kind words. So I guess a great way to get started is for those who are unfamiliar with who you are, would you mind just sharing a little bit more about yourself, Matt?
Yeah, sure. Right before we start, I shared a little bit about you, a little bit about my life with you. Grew up in Southern California to entrepreneurial parents who had vacation rental businesses around the world in some of the greatest, most ideal locations for the beach lifestyle. My family owned a home in Costa Rica on the beach. And so I grew up surfing and living an adventurous life. You know, I could tell tons of stories about our misadventures. My dad taking the wrong turn down in Baja, California, and us getting 3 flat tires along the way, or getting the Suburban stuck in the beach at low tide with the tide coming in, you know, just exciting adventures. And that's kind of what I've pursued my whole life, you know, is adventure. And my interests in business have kind of followed that as well. Recruiting is definitely an adventure. It's a lot of fun. And if you're a people person, you know, and you love the thrills of the chase, you know, there's no better industry to get into.
Would you agree that there's a lot of parallels of having a thrill-seeking, adventure-ridden life to business? Because in the former, it's all about pivoting, making the most of it. You don't know sometimes what's in front of you. Whatever happens, you have to adapt real time. And there's a lot of similarities, right? When it comes to business, a lot of the same stuff happens. So do you feel like throughout your childhood and your upbringing, you've unconsciously built a lot of great, just like a strong foundation, maybe also looking at your parents being entrepreneurial to help you find success working for yourself?
Oh, unquestionably. You know, I'll share a story with you. I'm big on stories and metaphors. Some of them land great, some of them not so much. But yeah, when I lived on the North Shore of Oahu, I shared with you previous to the call that I went to school at Brigham Young University in Hawaii, where if you're a surfer and you want to surf big waves or the best waves in the world, Sunset Beach, Waimea Bay, Pipeline, you know, you want to be on the North Shore of Oahu, and that's where the campus is. It's like 15 minutes from the best surf breaks in the world. And I prepared myself to go there. You know, I remember I shipped over a Volkswagen van with all of these surfboards made for big waves. And I remember I was unpacking my van, and a fellow student there that had been there for several years said, "Have you ever surfed over here?" And I said, "No, no, I haven't." And he says, "Well, why would you buy all these surfboards if you've never surfed over here? Like, do you even have any idea of the power of the ocean here and, you know, how dangerous the surfing is?" And I said, "No, that's why I'm here," you know? And so I think it's a mental thing, but I was really after big waves. That was kind of my life. Where I grew up in Southern California, the surf sucked most of the time. My home break was Torrance Beach, which is horrible surfing, but to those that don't know any better, right? Like, it was awesome. It was great. And, but when I went over to the North Shore, I was in search of the big waves that I had been eluded my whole life. And so I trained myself, you know, and I had a lot of confidence. I was a lifeguard on the beach in Los Angeles County, which, if there's any lifeguards watching this, they may hate on me for saying this, but they're the best lifeguards in the world. I mean, they're the best trained, the best swimmers by far. And so I felt like I was prepared, you know, but I would free dive every day, no swim fins, no weight belt, just a depth gauge on my wrist and a mask. And I'd free dive down 60 feet, pick up boulders, see how fast and how far I could walk underwater holding these boulders and just preparing myself, and surfing is not unlike business, right? And especially in the recruiting world, you have to be ready for whatever happens. Maybe, they hire somebody internally, or, they throw objections at you and you have to be able to, pivot immediately. And I was the first guy out at Waimea Bay every time it was breaking. And Waimea Bay is this iconic surfing spot. It's probably the birth of big wave surfing. And I remember one time they had actually closed the beach. Where I was living, the house was shaking and the swell was bigger than it had ever been when I was there. I was there for a few years and I was so excited I could barely sleep. And one of the premier big wave surfers in the world, I won't mention his name because this is probably embarrassing for him, but he met me down at Waimea and they had closed the beach off. They roped it off and we paddled out from a spot that was extremely dangerous. They closed the harbor so jet skis and boats couldn't make it out of the Haleiwa harbor. And we paddled out from a spot that I knew that if we didn't make it would be potentially, it could be death, and I made it out and he didn't. Luckily somebody took him to the hospital. But so I was out there in the ocean by myself and for a few hours, and then the traffic came to a standstill because everybody got out and was watching, and I got caught inside. So in other words, as you see these swells looming, your immediate reaction is to paddle as fast as you can to the middle of the bay where the waves aren't breaking. But these waves were closing out the entire bay. And, in surfing, when you come over the first wave, you just pray that the one behind it isn't much bigger and isn't, it isn't in a situation where you can't make it over. And I came over this wave and I could hear everybody yelling. There was thousands of people on the cliffs, screaming and yelling. And I saw that the wave was already starting to break. And so instead of paddling and wasting all that energy, I just sat on my board. And, in that situation, you're like, okay, all my training, everything has prepared me for this moment where I'm basically going to get hit by a freight train. And how am I going to be mentally, right? Like, am I going to be scared out of my mind? And in that moment, if you are scared, you exert all of your energy and your mental acuity just in your fear, right? And so I was able to calm myself down and tell myself that I'm going to make it. And so the lip of this wave landed like 10 feet in front of me. I stood on my board and dove down as far as I could. And I was under there for a few minutes. I let the next wave, I knew that I probably wouldn't be able to make it up in time before the next wave hit me. So I just prepared for that. And I allowed myself to be calm and not try and expend all my energy and air trying to get to the surface. And so I stayed under there for a minute or so, which seems like an eternity when you're getting thrashed around underwater. But I came up and I was perfectly fine. And so that's like a great metaphor, for business as well. Like when all hell is breaking loose and things aren't going your way, or that client's not paying that invoice, but you've got payroll, So it's a great being involved in sports like that or high risk endeavors really kind of prepares you for those moments in business where you have to be calm, you have to be cool, you have to be collected, and so yeah, there's definitely been for sure parallels with my adventures in surfing with my adventures in business. And if you're going to go into business, you might as well be doing something that kind of fills that need, because I haven't surfed a whole lot. There's not a lot of surf in Utah, and I have friends tell me all the time, oh no, we surf behind the boat. Well, that doesn't float my boat. I don't get thrilled by riding behind a $200,000 boat going 5 miles an hour. That's not my idea of surfing. But
yeah, very fair. And I love those analogies you drew, because as someone who's not super clued into surfing, like that again makes total sense to me. But I know one thing I'm wondering, and I'm sure Preston and some of the audience might be wondering too, is how do we make that transition from surfing to recruiting? Like, what was the story going from college in Hawaii, and how did that turn you into Matt recruiter?
Yeah, no. So I was a convert to the Mormon church when I was a kid, and my best friend was Mormon, and his family was they're the most incredible people in the world. I mean, honestly, their family is so close knit and they're so open to other people. I mean, there would be oftentimes I'd head over there and like their yard maintenance people would be sitting at the dinner table eating their food, and I'm like, wow, this is a unique relationship. And I just loved that. And I thought to myself, that's kind of how I want to be. And so I joined the Mormon church, and hence Brigham Young University in Hawaii. But I served a mission for 2 years in Mexico as a volunteer missionary for the church, kind of preaching the gospel. And when I came home and went to school, I actually roomed for a while at Brigham Young University in Idaho. I was there at that time. It was called Rick's College. And one of my roommates was one of the people I served my mission with. And he saw in me this tenacity, like missionaries, they're out from, 7 in the morning till 9 at night, working hard, to try and teach people and help people. And missionaries have one day day off to do their laundry and write letters home and stuff like that. And I rarely took those days off. I mean, I was too busy. I had too many people to teach, and I wasn't there to write letters home. I was there to do my business, and which was teaching people. And so he saw that in me and thought, wow, this guy's got a work ethic. And so he went to work for his brother that had a successful recruiting firm in Salt Lake City. And so when I was finishing up with my degree in international business, he said, hey, why don't you come to Salt Lake? We're making tons of money. We're killing it. You'll be a great recruiter. And so that's naturally where I left. After graduating, I went to Salt Lake to go work for this recruiting firm.
Wow, so interesting. Was it staffing or was it more direct perm, contingency?
Yeah, so it was a contingency placement firm. We did permanent and temporary staffing. So, we would do contract placements. So mainly software engineers, database administrators, network engineers. So it was in the technology space. But the week I arrived is when this was the year 2000 was when the dot-com bubble burst, like that week. And
tough time.
And I'm like, well, the largest technical employer in Utah just laid off 500 people, and I kind of saw the writing on the wall, but a lot of the recruiters there, they were just kind of stuck in that mindset of, yeah, we're gonna continue placing software engineers like it's always been. And I think I had that outside objectivity, coming in, because I didn't know what to expect, and that I was able to see that this is going to be a long road ahead. It's going to be a lot more difficult to find those very specific candidates to fill those positions. And so after a short stint there, I went to the boss and I told him my concerns. And he said, well, it sounds like you know better than we do. You should probably just start your own company. And so I did. And I had more success in my first couple of months on my own than I had working for those guys for nearly a year. And kind of the rest is history. I've started a bunch of different businesses, just really kind of following my interests and my gut. And ultimately I've come back to recruiting, but in the heavy civil construction industry. So placing, instead of software engineers and database administrators, like superintendents and project managers and estimators. And it's actually fun. Like, I love learning new things. And it's much like, to do the analogy with surfing, it's like learning I'm what they call a regular foot. So naturally I love surfing on my forehand. So facing the wave, and backside would be surfing a wave where your back is to the wave. And although I grew up, kind of my favorite surfing spot growing up was a place called Haggerty's, which is mentioned in that Beach Boys song Surfing USA. They mentioned Haggerty's, but I love that surfing spot. But it didn't have the power. It didn't have a barrel on it, the wave. There wasn't too much consequence there. And so it was like I needed to relearn how to surf on my backhand. Whereas growing up, I could take off on the wave and actually have a few seconds to think about what I wanted to do, like how I wanted to turn, where I wanted to do my bottom turn, where I wanted to hit the lip or whatever. In Hawaii, it's kind of like most of the waves there, you don't have the luxury of an easy drop in. You've got to immediately fall from the sky and grab your rail and pull into the barrel or hit the reef, and so I had to retool a little bit. And the same is with recruiting, the fundamentals are the same, your ability to get out in the lineup, your ability to make connections in the industry is the same, regardless of whoever it is that you're placing, whatever the industry is for. I mean, I love sharing with people that when I started my own business in 2001, it was terrible. I went from the dot-com bust, right, to starting a business in 2001 when 9/11 happened. I remember sitting there watching the television as the planes flew into the building. And so not the best time to be starting new businesses, but I was able to make those adjustments. And just like I had moving from surfing in Southern California to Hawaii, I had to learn the vernacular of whatever industry it was that I was placing for. But I famously, I share this, I say famously because I share this story with people all the time, that I placed a safety manager with a trucking company, and they had safety issues where one of their drivers inebriated, or I can't really remember what the story was ultimately, but instead of hitting the clutch and the brake, he hit the gas, ran into a service station, like went through the walls and the whole deal. And so much like in the heavy civil construction industry, where if there's a mistake or somebody's injured on a job site, you got OSHA crawling all over you. In the trucking industry, you've got the Department of Transportation all up in your grill, doing investigations. So they needed a new safety director. And it was cool because I'm kind of old school. We didn't have LinkedIn, wasn't a thing. Indeed certainly didn't exist. And so I had to do some pretty unconventional things, like find out who that person is, talk to people that knew that person, and then wait in the parking lot, for when the guy was coming out, or, things like that. But that particular placement that I made, the CEO of this company didn't want to talk to me. He said, "Who are you? I have the best recruiters in the world in the transportation industry working on filling this placement. Why would I work with you?" And I said, "Well, are any of them in your parking lot? I'm right outside your door. I have my fee agreement. And if you consider this a waste of time, then just spend 60 seconds, sign my agreement, and let me waste my time." And he went on to give me requisitions for a lot of their technical placements as well. And so I placed their CTO, and then I placed them a software engineer, and we built a great relationship. And that's a cool story because I built that rapport with him, and he kind of liked my attitude. And ultimately, that in the trucking industry, there's a lot of companies that go out of business, dynamics change, fuel prices, what have you. And that company ultimately filed for bankruptcy. So I got the bankruptcy notice in the mail, and I thought, oh no, are they going to pay my invoice? And they owed me like 26 grand or something. And the CEO called me like a week later and said, "Did you get paid?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Come on down, I'll write you a personal check." And I love that about the industry as well, as you really get to know these people. And if you have the right mindset, people can sense when you truly care. If it's just about a placement and getting a check, or if you actually care about the contributions that candidate makes to the company. If that candidate of yours is truly going to fill that need that they have, that they came to you for, right? So in a lot of ways, they're relying on us. Can you solve my problems through the candidate that you find? And, I had a conversation with a CEO last night in the well into the evening, and he called me to tell me that he was making an offer for one of my candidates, and he was thanking me for making that introduction. And this was a candidate that was not interested in talking to me. In fact, several recruiters in our office had already called this person, and I told them, I said, "Guys, come on in here, come in my office." I said, "Let me show you how it's done." And I got him to take a breakfast meeting with the CEO. And he says, "I'm happy where I'm at. Why would I look at an opportunity?" And I just got him. I said, "Why would you pass up on the opportunity to have coffee and a bagel with the CEO of the number one company in your industry in your city? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, if anything, make a friend, make a connection that may be valuable to you in the future." And as it turns out, I think I'm going to get the fish in the boat. I think that I'm waiting for an offer today, and I think that I'm going to make that placement. But in that same conversation, he told me that a placement that I'd made the month before wasn't going to work out. And that turns out that they had hired a screamer, and he's on the job site yelling at people. And he said, that's not how we do business. And I was able to say, "Hey, I apologize for that." And so I came into the office this morning. I was making calls to find a replacement for that candidate. And that's the other thing is, like, this industry is small. So, like, if you do screw up, it's important to own it, and a lot of times the people business is hard. You never know if people are telling you the truth or not, what their true, personality is like. Everybody's going to say that they're cool hand Luke, right? Like, they, when problems arise, that they handle them with maturity and professionalism. But what I've learned is it's very few people that when they're put under pressure, they actually can maintain their calm and deliver. But so, yeah, I love that aspect though. This is just an opportunity for me to be able to show him that we truly care, and by finding that replacement candidate immediately, we want to shock him, and find somebody that is even better than that particular candidate.
So you left your recruiting job, you started your own company, you seem to be finding a lot of great success. What's your one secret sauce, Matt, on why you think you succeeded in recruiting when many recruiters failed? Is it really that work ethic? Is it really that empathy and care? Or is there something else?
Preston, you hit the nail on the head. This is an easy question for me. I tell my kids all the time that attitude isn't important. Attitude is everything. And it's no matter what you're doing in life. But I said you hit the nail on the head when you said empathy and caring. You have to care. If you don't care, if it is all about a paycheck to you, then recruiting is not the right industry. You may have some success, but you won't have tremendous success. You won't, because you're just a dime a dozen. I got another call this morning from a CEO of a company in Colorado Springs, and my initial phone call with him was with him yelling at me, and he used quite a few expletives. And he said, "Don't try and sell telling me, you guys are like used car salesmen, blah, blah, blah. How long have you known this candidate? And I said, about a year. Bullshit, and he said to me, he called me to tell me that my placement with their company last month was the best placement they've ever done. And he says, I want to talk to you about 2 superintendent positions. And he said, I want to let you know you are the only company I will work with on these.
Amazing.
So, and that is, I'm kind of leaving out an important thing. When he grilled me, I said, you know what, that's fine. I said, we need a fishing pond, a place to pull from. Thank you. And I hung up the phone, and he called me back like 30 seconds later and said, hey, I think we got off on the wrong foot. And a challenge, sorry to beat a dead horse with the analogies, but like I remember one time driving along the Kamehameha Highway, which is the freeway that goes along that 7-mile stretch of beach with all the amazing surf spots. And there was about 100 people on the cliffs watching. And it was this place called Jocko's. And it was unlike I'd ever seen. I mean, it was probably, 25 foot on the face of the wave and just looking like pipeline, perfectly peeling. And I'm like, why isn't anyone out there? How come it's empty? And the sun had already set, I think. And I just grabbed my board, and as I was paddling out, there was a guy coming in, and his eyes were like saucer, and he's like, I almost died. And I very quickly realized why. And the current was sucking so hard right into the impact zone where all the waves were breaking. And after getting like 20 waves right on the head, and my leash, I had a big wave leash that was super thick and very long, and my board, I thought the leash was going to break and board was going to go in on the rocks. But I took it as such a challenge that I literally scrambled along the reef for about a half a mile down where I knew that there was a channel at this surfing spot called Laneakea. And then I paddled as hard as I possibly could for about 30 minutes because the current was so strong heading to the west that it was hard to get back to the point break. But I realized that I got clobbered, but I made it in to where I paddled out. And that was success to me. And I'm like, I didn't give up, and that same tenacity is what you need to have in recruiting, like you're going to have stretches where you lose every day, you lose. And I make it a point that I never leave my desk without a win. Like I stay in the fight until I get a win. And sometimes that win is an email from a client that says, sorry, we're going to pass on your candidate. It's like, great. At least I know that. Now I can go home, and like, so you're constantly having to like spin. And just like I considered that a win that I didn't die, I didn't get the wave of my life, but I didn't give up. And I paddled back in where I paddled out, and so that's how I kind of see things. There's a lot of reframing that you need to do in this industry and take those losses as wins. And when a client says no to you, they don't want to work with you, take that as a win. Like, great. Now I know a great company that I can pull great candidates from,
I actually agree with you. I'd rather hear a yes or no than just nothing, because then you're just stuck in limbo, not knowing what to do, what action to take, right? Yeah. And so getting a no is fantastic. I'm like, great, now I have action, I have data, now I can take next steps forward. How big is your agency now? Like, how big is your team?
Yeah, there's 9 of us.
Nice.
So we're pretty small. The industry is pretty small. I don't know how many recruiters are actually in our industry. There's a few big shops out there, but we see an advantage in being kind of like not so visible. We don't do any marketing really, and we're just stay a super low profile. It's like, sure, we'd love to be the MMA fighter coming into the ring, with some great music with an entourage behind us, but we'd rather be the ninja, coming in the middle of the night and being super effective.
What do you think, Matt, is the difference between a recruiter who can only bill like $50K a year versus one that can bill 6 figures to one that can do multiple 6 figures, even 7 figures on their desk?
Well,
is there anything that kind of separates them?
Well, yeah, most definitely. Tenacity, I think, is number one. But I think in this industry is so lucrative that if you're not making 6 figures a year, find another industry to be in. Mm-hmm. To be honest with you, this industry is so lucrative that, you're talking 50,000 to 6 figures, I mean, you should be able to make 5 figures a month at a minimum. Otherwise, what are you doing? So if you're a one-man band, I would say at least a place a month, at least. And when you figure in the recruiting industry, most companies that people will pay you to hire are going to be 6 figures at a minimum. And if you have the proper niche, you're charging, 20% minimum on a contingency placement. I mean, you figure 20% of 100K is 20K. So if you're doing one a month, you're doing, you're making a couple $100,000. I think that, and you guys know this better than me, to get into the industry, you don't need a whole lot. I mean, shoot, you can go buy an adequate computer now from Walmart for $250, an internet connection, and you're in business. You don't have to invest in the super expensive software. We found that to be the case with like PC recruiter software. That may float some people's boat, but in my opinion, I don't want my recruiters spending more time in the CRM logging calls and emails and text messages than actually doing it. You should be on the phone all day long. You should be intermittently meeting with people face to face. Now, our firm is searching from coast to coast and in the islands as well. And so it's not super simple for us to get on a plane and go and meet a client in Florida or New York, but that's what you need to do, right? Like you need to have FaceTime with these people. Can you be successful being a keyboard warrior and living on the beach in Costa Rica and doing this? Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the benefits. I think that's one of the draws that recruiting should have for people is the ability to do it wherever they are. When they're on vacation, you need to have that flexibility to be able to take that phone call. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I have literally pulled the Suburban over. I've got 9 kids that call me dad, so it gets a little rowdy at times in the Stoker household, but how many times I've had to pull the vehicle over and freaking run down behind a building or run down into a ravine to take a phone call in quiet, And so that's, so long as you have the internet connection, you have a phone, you can do this job anywhere.
I think tenacity is absolutely key, right? Recruiting as a profession, it's one of those things where anyone can become a recruiter, but not everyone become actually a good recruiter, right? And I think the reason why I'm so fascinated to get a better understanding of what you've done before recruiting is over the years, we've come to develop or notice a pattern of people who are high performers, whether they're a solo recruiter or people who run successful businesses. And also this applies to other business owners outside of recruiting. But I think people who are able to really develop that discipline before whenever they start working for themselves, whether it's like a sales job, whether it's doing something like even being a missionary, right? Where it's extremely difficult. You have to wake up every day, talk to new people you don't even know, knock on doors, really developing that rhino skin, the discipline, the work ethic, or even maybe athletics, like surfing, which you seem to have done all 3, to be able to kind of find success in those and channeling that into a job like recruiting, I think doesn't guarantee you'll be a successful recruiter, but certainly it can increase the probability of you finding success, especially if you're able to maintain that discipline and tenacity that you've done before, right? So I think it totally makes sense to me to see how you started recruiting business only roughly, you said, over a year after your first recruiting job, same with me, and to see you keep going, building what you and your team are doing, I think is really, really remarkable, honestly. So hats off to you. Now, I am curious though, where do you see kind of recruiting going into the future? How do you see the profession evolving? And is there one thing that you can kind of think of that recruiters should really focus on right now if they want to continue finding success moving forward?
Absolutely, your ability to adapt. You've got to be flexible, and whether that is artificial intelligence is a whole can of worms, that's a pretty deep rabbit hole. And I don't know if you guys want to dive into that right now for this podcast, but I think AI is going to be disruptive in every aspect of our lives. And I know it's a big concern with most people right now. And I'm sure that may be part of the draw for your business is people looking at the future of their employment thinking, wow, I need to start thinking about pivoting. And there's just there's opportunities abound if you're flexible, if you can adapt very well. So that's another one of those attributes that I think someone needs to have to be a successful recruiter, is to be flexible and have that adaptability. When heaven forbid you get a diagnosis, or a loved one of yours, this last year, my mother got diagnosed with cancer, and I look at how they adapted to it and their attitude towards it. And it was like, I'm going to be fine, and my mother is amazing. My parents are incredible, and they're people that I admire, look up to, and I'm sure that I got some of that from them, like the ability to just adapt. And my mother's fine, and my father says that their home looks like a botanical garden, because she's just out of cancer treatment and she's in the yard all day long, planting things. And last time I was there, she says, "Can you help me dig a ditch?" And she's making a French drain. I mean, they're just incredible people.
Amazing.
And so if you have to have that ability, and I understand that not everybody was born with that, right? And different people take things differently. Some people, if they get some news or they lose a client, it's hard for them to get out of that funk, and that is an attribute that is absolutely necessary in our industry, is the ability to take a licking and keep on ticking. And kind of a mantra that I have for the Stoker family is never back down and never stay down, like be that guy that never stops. I was in a jiu-jitsu tournament in Hawaii, actually, and I had beaten everybody in my weight classes. And at that time, I was a skinny guy. I'm 6'4", and at the time I weighed in at like 183 pounds for this tournament. I dropped weight to enter the tournament. And so they had a super heavy weight. It was 362 pounds and almost twice my body weight. And his arms were like the size of my thighs, a big Polynesian guy. And they said, "Matt, fight this guy." And it was a 5-minute fight, and he was choking me out for about 4 minutes. But I just didn't tap, because I was so pissed off that I couldn't do anything. So I figured a win is not tapping out on this guy. He's going to beat me, but I'm not going to tap. And I turned blue, but I survived. And I think that that's what you need to have. You have to have this tenacity where the client says, "You know what? We need this guy on our side. Like, maybe we're not going to use a recruiter very much, but holy hell, I want this guy on my team," And we have clients, right, that we've never made a placement with, but they call us. They call me just to say, "Hey, Matt, can I bounce some things off of you?" And I think that they do that because they know that we care. Just through a few phone calls, conversations. "Hey, Marcus, how's it going? What's going on over there?" Being aware of what's going on in the client's location, being aware of what projects they've won, what projects they lost. I mean, I called a client of mine and I said, "Hey man, I'm so sorry, brother. I saw that you lost that bid by $100. It was like a multi-million-dollar job, and they lost the bid by a couple $100." And he was like, "Damn you for bringing that up," But it let him know that he knows that I was empathetic, that on Christmas Eve, I saw that he lost that bid and I was thinking of him. And if you take the time to make those calls and demonstrate that care, right? Like to be aware of what's going on in their business, or if you hear of something where there's an accident on a job site and you call to give your condolences, they'll remember that. And even if they have no intention of ever really paying you for your services, there will come a time where they will be in a major jam and they will call you. I think of a client of mine in Tallahassee, Florida, that the CEO called me. He pulled up on a job site as he saw his foreman get run over and killed. And he called me crying, and I actually placed a safety director with him for free. I didn't even charge him. He called me crying, and that was another one of those situations where he calls me from time to time just to thank me. That's the best hire I've made in 36 years.
I love the emphasis on caring and empathy, because I think it's very easy, Matt, for people to come into this profession only thinking about the finances and transactions and money. And I also love the fact that you're like, you know what? You should make the effort to meet people in person, because there's so much emphasis on doing things online, right? Now that's easier than ever. Internet's everywhere. Now everyone's obsessed with AI and automation. It's so easy to be a keyboard warrior. But even with us and our agency, some of our biggest clients are the ones that we met in person over a decade decade ago, right? Because you remained memorable and personable, you made the effort, and that makes you different compared to all these other keyboard warrior recruiters that are just hiding behind emails, blasting them, right, with generic emails and messages every single day. And so I think like as this profession goes more online and heavier on tech, it's still really important to remind ourselves that we are a people-to-people business. The real success and sustainable business long-term comes from real relationships, where really the best way to do that is making the extra effort, right? To kind of create those personal relationships, shake someone's hand, see someone, sit across from them in the same room. And because boy, oh boy, that's extremely powerful.
Yeah, I make it a point to tell all of my prospective clients that if we can't be friends, let's not do business together. And I've had people say to me, well, that's stupid. And I said, well, just the fact that you just made that statement tells me that we're not a good fit.
Yeah.
And there's some people that that's the other thing, right? Is like, don't try and fit a square peg in a round hole. If you sense that just the culture of the company, and which is a top-down thing, right? If the CEO is this rigid number crunching a-hole, like why do business with a guy like that, right? That wants to renegotiate the terms of the agreement after they want to hire somebody or something, you know? I mean, it's important to be flexible. So like, I don't mind earning that check. Like, okay, all right, you know, you want a concession on this one? Okay, that's cool. But on the second one, you're going to pay me X amount, right? You know, and it just shows them that you're flexible, that you'll work with them. And sometimes it's easy to forget that big companies have financial problems as well. I mean, just look at the business environment today. You see, like, I'm just thinking of a company that we all know. It's in every town, you know, Joann's, right? This big company that sells to people that like to knit or crochet or whatever it is. Actually, I don't know much about Joann's, but they're closing like 600 stores or something like that. You know, and so big companies can fail too. And don't have this mindset of like, these big companies are just trying to steamroll us. Well, what you don't understand is maybe the CEO isn't even paying himself. Maybe they're on the verge of bankruptcy and they're in a tailspin and they're relying on you to help them out of that tailspin. And they'll remember that in the future, right? It's like, it goes back to the CEO that wrote me a personal check. I mean, if you want somebody to be loyal to you, be loyal to them and work with them. Don't make assumptions.
Yeah, focus on the basics, care about them, relationships.
Yeah, it's easy to make assumptions. And when you do, you usually, I think, what's that phrase, like making assumptions makes an ass out of you and them, right? Like, just don't make assumptions. If you're not hearing back right away, don't make assumptions. Maybe wait and find out. Maybe the hiring manager is out because he just had his first baby or his wife, you know, died. You never know, right? And so don't make those assumptions. And I've learned these things from making mistakes. Pain is the greatest teacher, and I've experienced a lot of pain in my life.
That's how you learn, that's how you grow, and that's how you're forced to like really do hard, real introspection to hold yourself accountable and then just really understand how you got there in the first place. So you get wiser and better and smarter down the line, right?
Yeah, it's your hope.
Now, going back to AI and automation, we are personally very excited about it to see like just in general, the potential of technology, but also how it applies to recruitment. Are you guys using any automation or AI tools at your agency, or do you have any favorite tools out there, or just are you also excited about AI?
Oh, I'm super excited about artificial intelligence, and at the same time, I've got my H1 Hummer that's it's all mechanical. You know, there's and making preparations for that, because I don't think people truly understand the ramifications of what's coming down the pike. But it's very scary, you know, to be honest. I'm not a fear monger at all, but, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. So now's the time to get your finances in order and, maybe scope out some land out in the middle of the desert. In all reality, right? Like, you've got to plan for the worst case scenario, because there's going to be a lot of hurt. And I want to be on the other side of that. I want to be a winner. And so, yeah, we've been embracing artificial intelligence in our business. Without it, would we be effective? Absolutely. but it's streamlined so many aspects of our business. And I don't want to share too much of our secret sauce, but I would just say we use AI all day in our business. And I'll share one of the tools that if you're a recruiter and you're not utilizing this, you need to today, which is otter.ai. There's many different programs out there, but I found Otter to be the most simple, and that's recording every single phone call. It's very important to go back and listen, and then to summarize your conversation, bullet points, and then also like when you're getting a requisition from a CEO or area manager or hiring authority, and they're giving you those details, your pen cannot write as fast as artificial intelligence can transcribe your phone conversation and give you those details. And so that's super important. And then we actually will upload those conversations to our customer relationship management software. So we can go back and we can review that.
I'm really happy to hear that you are embracing AI. I think it's very easy for companies not to, or intentionally just believe that nothing's happening with AI and it's not going to affect them. But we're seeing more and more that companies that don't embrace it, they're just going to have a harder time and they're going to be left behind. And those that do, you find your team to be able to still be as efficient and even way more so, right, with technology. But I really loved how you say that, hey, can we still be successful without AI? Absolutely. I love the fact that you say that, because a lot of recruiters also look at AI as a silver bullet. And if they don't even know how to be a good recruiter, they hope that AI can make them into a good recruiter, which I believe is not the case. AI helps you become a better recruiter, or helps your workflow become better than it already is now. So you need to have a really strong foundation, and AI can build on top of that instead of building that foundation for you. And so it's great to see a team like you that are building at such a high level, because it's easier for you, Matt, to sit back and be like, you know what? We don't have to use AI. Life is great. We can just keep things manual. We can still bill multiple 7 figures a year. Life is good. But for you to also be aware and, keep your finger on the pulse, but also like implement AI intentionally in your business, I think to be proactive is very, very important.
I'll just make this last comment about AI, unless you want to talk about it more, but we had a recruiter that lived in AI. And it was literally, he was asking ChatGPT about every next move that they were making. And I think to your point, that's a crutch, that you can't rely on, because this is a people face-to-face business, whether that's a virtual face-to-face or in-person face-to-face. I mean, you're going to be put on the spot and you can't really say, can you hold on one second? Let me consult with ChatGPT before I respond. Yeah. And so it's important to have those fundamentals for sure.
For someone who's listening to the audience who is maybe itching to start their own business, perhaps they've never done it before, this is their first experience, what is your big one overarching advice you would give that person?
That's a tough one. I would say never quit, but be realistic. I think one of the biggest mistakes that I made in business early on in my career was just that. It's like, there is such a thing as your greatest strength being your greatest weakness. And, it reminds me of that song, I think it was Kenny Rogers, that said, know when to hold them and know when to fold them, know when to walk away. Like, if you are grinding at this for months, for 6 months, and you cannot make a placement, if you can't get a fee agreement signed in your first 60 days, this isn't for you. Would you say that that's a fair assessment?
I think so.
Yeah. And then also, like I tell new recruiters, like we hired a gentleman that was at the top of his game, working for one of the largest heavy civil construction companies in the world, a company called Maztec. And he was the vice president of equipment and managing well over 10,000 pieces of equipment, and very software intensive. They have tracking devices on all their equipment, and they can do remote diagnostics of equipment and so forth. The guy was making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and he made the switch over to recruiting with a lot of trepidation and fear. And I told him, I said, hey, look, you have the bones. You know this. You know the industry inside and out. If in the first 60 days, you can't put the power to the pavement, hey, don't be ashamed of yourself. Like, you gave it a good shot. But you need to, just so you know, 6 months minimum. And for anyone that's getting into the industry, the first 6 months are going to be extremely painful. Like nobody comes into this business a rock star right out of the gate. It just doesn't happen. I don't care who you are. It's going to be minimum 6 months of a lot of very long days, pounding a lot of rock stars or drinking a lot of coffee, And so, but there's really no other way to do it, no pain, no gain, like you said. You've got to put in the time. And if you aren't on the phone, get out of the business. A lot of people, that is their number one fear, is picking up that phone and getting rejected. And if you have that fear, it's going to be it's going to be double difficult. Like you said, like technology, people hiding behind the computer, like you've got to get on the phone and be able to have those very difficult conversations.
Yeah, technology is great, but I think it can make also a lot of people soft and just scared to do what you actually have to do, which is like pick up the phone, right? And so recruiting is sales. If you can't do or handle any aspect of sales, talking to people you don't know, receiving constant rejection or failure, being able to pick up that phone, absolutely recruiting, it may not be for you. It's going to be extremely difficult. What are you most excited about in the future? Is there anything that kind of really jumps out?
Opportunity. It's exciting, right? Even, I've thought about this quite a bit. I have a friend that's on the forefront of artificial intelligence. He's friends with like Ray Kurzweil, the chief engineer behind Google, and making predictions about artificial intelligence 20 years ago, and he's got a PhD from Oxford, very smart guy. And he tells me, be very scared about AI. Like get a bunker, like kind of a thing. And, I see it as we are living in the most exciting time ever in the history of our world. And if we all go out with robots, coming in from the sky, like that's going to be pretty damn exciting. I don't know of a better way to go out as a civilization than freaking robots, that we designed and programmed, turning on us. But as far as the industry is concerned, it's just exciting. It's really exciting to see the changes and to embrace them. But I guess my piece of advice would be not to get distracted. If you find yourself spending most of your time exploring solutions to problems that you can handle on your own, maybe it's time to get out of the industry, because at the end of the day, Preston, Ryan, you guys are going to be really difficult to replace, and I don't think that artificial intelligence is going to be able to replace you anytime soon. Just the complexity of our ability to empathize with people. And at the end of the day, right, like this is a people business. So how is artificial intelligence going to replace a person? We're so complex, and you have to be able to think on your feet and adapt. And I just don't know if artificial intelligence will be able to do that, because a lot of what we do is touch, feel, sales. Artificial intelligence will be able to articulate the reasons why somebody should hire somebody over another. But most of the time when we present a 5-star candidate to a company that we feel is the perfect fit, and then the CEO says, I can't tell you why I don't want to hire them, it's just a gut feeling. How is artificial intelligence going to replace gut feeling? People are complex, and much more complex than I think a program or software will ever be.
I completely agree. I think it's really those like one-off mundane tasks that will be replaced and augmented by automation or AI, but it's really the essence of what makes a human human, the nuances, the emotion, that it's going to take a long time, if ever, for AI to be able to do that perfectly, right? Now, as we're nearing towards the podcast, Matt, there's always so many other things I would love to talk more about, but of course we want to respect your time. Is there anything before we let you go that we haven't talked about that you wish we talked about for the audience?
Well, this is kind of a personal thing. You mentioned before we jumped on the podcast, you said, that Ryan had told you that I had another business. Well, I do have another business. One of my passions is people. And one of the things that ails us is our healthcare system. It's broken. It's largely driven by insurance companies. And thankfully, we've got RFK, and they're trying to change some things. I saw a little soundbite the other day where RFK was getting grilled by Congress or somebody, and they were criticizing him, and he said, well, you've been with the CDC or whoever it was with Congress for 20 years. You state that you've been trying to get food dyes out of our food your entire time, and I did it in 100 days, And so a lot of what we're ingesting daily, not just from social media and all this content on the internet that's damaging to us, our kids, kids playing World of Warcraft all night long, and things like that are pretty detrimental to a person's development, is also like everything that we're ingesting, our food and the healthcare system, our doctors, they're treating symptoms. They're not really addressing the core issue. Why are you experiencing sleep deprivation? Why are you experiencing pains? Or how did you get this autoimmune disease? The system is not set up to address these issues. And my wife is a widow. Her husband previous passed away due to suicide, and she dealt with post-traumatic stress disorder. And if we saw a police car, ambulance, it would cause her to start to have a physical reaction and then start crying, and it would be hard for her to get out of that. And I didn't have much experience with that, and I started hearing about this hallucinogen ayahuasca and how it helped a lot of people with post-traumatic stress disorder. And my other business, it's called Awake Healer, so awakehealer.com. And indigenous people around the world, they possess a whole lot of wisdom, and I think we've lost a lot of that. Most of the medications that people take these days, all it is synthesized plants, so there is a cure for every disease in nature. And people usually associate psychedelics with like people that live in a van down by the river, or that are sleeping with pillows with crystals underneath or whatever. They're looking at their horoscope every day to determine what they're going to do next or whatever. But there's a lot of people out there, very smart people, that have embraced natural medicines. And I just learned this week that some scientists in a lab somewhere at a university developed a new cure or I don't know if it's a cure or at least a medication for schizophrenia through the flipping of two atoms in a molecule of LSD. And I've never taken LSD. I'm not for synthesized drugs, really. I've never been inebriated, in my life. I've never been drunk or anything like that. But I thought that it was worthwhile after listening to a Joe Rogan podcast, and I watched everything I could and read everything I could about ayahuasca for the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder. And my wife and I took the plunge, went down to the Amazon jungle in Peru and sat with an indigenous Shipibo from the Shipibo tribe, had this medicine woman give us some ayahuasca. And I was so skeptical, and I'm like, well, I'm here, babe, drinking this stuff too, and I didn't really think it was going to have much effect. And it was probably one of the most profound experiences of my entire life. And I was thinking, I don't need anything to heal from. All these people down here are searching for healing. And what I found was what it was able to do is give me a new perspective on myself. And I realized that, wow, I've been carrying around a big bag of rocks, and ayahuasca said, hey, take a look at these different areas of your life, and you can set that bag of rocks down. You don't have to carry that around your whole life. And so I'm a big proponent of that. And while it's illegal here in the United States, we found that ayahuasca is known as the combination of two different plants. Ayahuasca is actually a vine. And they mix that with a leaf of another plant called chacruna that contains high levels of dimethyltryptamine, which is, if you don't know anything about that, it's referred to as the God particle. And science has just realized that when we're born, our bodies are flooded with dimethyltryptamine, that we have what's referred to as the third eye. We all have a gland that creates, a pine cone shaped gland that creates DMT in our bodies. We create it in our lungs as well. But our bodies are flooded with that when we're born and when we die. And we have found that just ayahuasca itself, without the chacruna, is incredible. I mean, I get emails all the time from people saying that it completely changed their life. Our product is for microdosing. That's our primary product, is the vine only of ayahuasca. And if I had known all the hoops that I would need to jump through to be able to sell that online, I probably would have never done it. But our goal is really to educate people and to provide these indigenous medicines and wisdom from these people that are so much smarter than us in so many ways. I mean, I don't mean to take too much time, but I went with this tribe in the middle of the Amazon, the Nomanawa tribe, deep in the jungle. And they said, we're going fishing. We went out the next day. We're traipsing through the jungle. And I'm like, well, where's the spears? Where's the fishing rods? And we went down there, and they made this mash and for the sake of brevity, they basically took plants and a certain quantity of leaves from one tree and leaves from a bush, and they put them in a hole, and then they made a mash, and they tossed it in the river, and the fish floated to the surface, and the women went over and picked up the fish and put it in the basket. And these people are very smart, and they're very connected, and they have medicines. They don't have a Rite Aid and a Walgreens, and of course, what they're affected by is not necessarily what we're affected by, but there are cures for a lot of what ails us. And we try to bring a lot of those medicines, make them available. And part of the reason why we do that, that's mainly a labor of love. My wife has never experienced PTSD episode since that first ingestion of ayahuasca back
That's
in
amazing.
2015. And so we want to make that available to people on awakehealer.com. You can get some of these medicines. Some of it's way outside the box, like this is a curipe. It's a self-applicator for a medicine that you blow up your nose. One goes up your nostril, one goes in your mouth, and you blow it. And then we have different medicines. I think we're the only company in the world that sources these medicines directly from the indigenous tribes. It's not unlike what the Chinese are doing with a lot of our products that we create. My father was in China one time, and he's like, Matt, I'm at this on the street. They have every kind of Helly Hansen, North Face. Do you need any snowboarding gear? It's all right here. And it's all like pirated. It's all ripped off, And what's happening is these indigenous people that have next to nothing but their knowledge and their sacred medicines, they hold these medicines sacred, are being ripped off, and they're being sold by people out of like Peru, that have little factories that are making their own stuff and then passing it off as if it's coming from a tribe in Brazil,
Sure.
This is from the Yawanawas. No, it's not. And they're not receiving anything for it. But it's really cool to see like the growth of these tribes and that they're able to purchase materials to have a roof over their head. And purpose of our website right now is from the sale of these products, to be able to get them 30-year water filters so that constructed. We want to have a little factory there in Brazil and get these out to the tribes, so that's where most of their illnesses are coming from, is because they're drinking right out of the river. And, so if there's a dead animal around the bend, they're getting a lot of that bacteria and ingesting that, and it's making them sick. So
cool.
So just, that's our other business, is awakehealer.com. And
sure.
It's been an adventure, to say the least, in building that business.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate you sharing that. Perhaps that could be a podcast part 2, because me and Ryan both were very much fascinated about healthcare, health and wellness and all that. But I really appreciate your time, Matt. I really appreciate you sharing more about your upbringing, your family. I can't speak for Ryan, but perhaps you inspired us both to pick up a surfboard and go to the nearest waves to give that a go. Perhaps even go car shopping for an H1 to be ready for the future. But honestly, very impressed with what you've done with recruiting to you and your team, and very excited to see what you guys will do into the future. So definitely appreciate your time. I'll certainly include your information, your recruitment agency, also your new health and wellness product in our description, so people go ahead and check it out. But really appreciate your time, and looking forward to continuing to keep in touch and supporting you on your journey.
Hey, same here, guys. Thank you so much. Pleasure's mine.
Thank you, Matt.